A man, a decision, and a life forever changed. James Carter wandered through the showroom he had once built from the ground up. Today, he looked just like any other customer, but without realizing it, he was about to become something much more. A tired-eyed father, a shy-looking child, and a crumpled envelope. What seemed like a simple sale was actually a turning point in someone's life. Because sometimes, the greatest profit isn't measured in a bank account but in the heart. And that day, James Carter was about to be reminded of that once again. The scent of motor oil and fresh leather lingered in the air of Carter Auto's showroom. As James Carter walked through the dealership he had proudly built from the ground up, he wasn't here as an owner today. This time, he had stepped inside as just another customer. Walking in off the street. But this place carried his blood, sweat, and dreams. As he glanced at the framed photos on the walls, memories flooded back the grand opening, the first car he ever sold, the first time he earned a customer's trust. And yet, standing here now, in the very business he had poured his life into, he felt like a stranger. His eyes landed on the row of trucks lined up in the corner of the showroom. Today, he'd be driving one out of here. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about buying a truck. This was about coming to terms with his past and maybe, just maybe, taking the first step toward a new beginning. James gave a slight nod, his voice firm. Yeah, I need something solid, built to last. Under the bright showroom lights, Ryan led him through the neatly lined-up vehicles to a deep blue pickup truck. Its metallic surface gleamed smoothly under the lights. With a confident smile, Ryan tapped the hood lightly. This model has it all: power, durability, and a long-term warranty. It won't let you down. You won't regret it. James studied the truck carefully. Its sharp lines, strong stance, and rugged build exuded confidence. He took a step back, hands in his pockets, letting his gaze travel over the entire vehicle. Was this really what he needed? Just a truck, or was it something more, a symbol of a new beginning? Sensing his hesitation, Ryan kept the momentum going. The engine delivers top-tier performance. No matter the terrain, it won't give you trouble. Hauling, long drives, daily use. Whatever you need, this truck can handle it. James tilted his head slightly, his eyes still fixed on the truck. Something inside him stirred. The moment of decision was getting closer. James had taken an instant liking to Ryan. The young man's attitude felt genuine. He wasn't one of those pushy salesmen trying to shove a deal down his throat. Instead, he actually seemed to want to help, and James appreciated that. As Ryan went on about the truck's features, James let his gaze wander around the showroom. Employees were busy at work, some chatting with customers, others laughing near the coffee station. A warmth spread through him. This place wasn't just a dealership he had built to sell cars, it had become a community. His employees weren't just workers, they were part of something bigger. Seeing them happy reminded him that business wasn't just about profit. It was about people. About trust. It was like a family. And for the first time in a while, James felt a quiet sense of pride and peace. Just as Ryan started explaining the financing options, James, who had grown accustomed to the usual hum of the showroom, suddenly caught a different tone cutting through the noise. "Excuse me, sir." James turned toward the voice, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in the person standing behind him. A brief silence hung in the air. He didn't know who he was about to face, but deep down, he could tell this wasn't going to be just another casual customer interaction. James turned slowly at the sound of the voice and found himself looking into a pair of tired but kind eyes. The middle-aged man standing before him carried the weight of years on his face, the lines etched deep as if life hadn't been particularly kind to him. His calloused hands, rough and worn, told their own story: years of hard labor, of carrying burdens most people never had to think about. Between his fingers, he clutched a crumpled envelope, gripping it tightly as if it was the most important thing in the world. Beside him stood a young boy, awkwardly shifting on his feet. His head was tilted downward, eyes fixed on the floor as if counting the tiles beneath him. His jacket was slightly oversized, worn but clean. He didn't say a word, just stood there quietly, as if trying to make himself invisible. James took in the man's appearance, then let his eyes fall once more to the envelope in his hand. This wasn't just another customer. He could feel it. There was something this man needed to say, but he didn't seem to know where to start. "How can I help you?" James asked, his voice calm and steady. The man cleared his throat and swallowed hard. For a brief moment, his gaze flickered toward his son before settling back on James. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come easily. A brief silence hung in the air. James could tell this wasn't going to be just a simple sale. The man tightened his grip on the crumpled envelope and leaned forward slightly. His voice was cautious, hesitant, but carried a quiet sincerity. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I heard you talking about the trucks," he said, barely louder than a whisper. "Are you trading yours in?" James furrowed his brow slightly, trying to piece together what the man was really asking. This wasn't a straightforward sales inquiry, he could feel it. His eyes briefly flickered over the man's worn flannel sleeves, his calloused hands, and the boy still staring down at the floor. "I was considering it," James said, softening his tone. "Why do you ask?" The man swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the envelope. For a moment, he seemed to be weighing whether he had the courage to speak. Then, with a deep breath, he lifted his head. "Because maybe I could buy it," he said, his voice wavering between uncertainty and quiet desperation. "My son and I, we need one." James could now see it clearly. There was more to this than just a transaction. Whatever burden this man carried, it wasn't just about buying a truck. It was in the way he clutched that crumpled envelope. In the way his son stood beside him, too ashamed to meet anyone's gaze. This wasn't about money. It was about something much deeper. The man took a deep breath, his eyes briefly flickering toward his son. In that tired gaze, James could see the weight of responsibility, the silent burden of a father doing everything he could. Then, the man turned back to James, his voice slow but genuine. "My name's Tom," he said, hesitating for a moment. "And this is my son, Ethan." He gestured toward the shy young man beside him. "He got accepted into a university a few towns over." There was pride in his words, but beneath it, a shadow of worry lingered. Tom paused, inhaling deeply before continuing. "I work in construction. The truck I've been using for years. It completely gave out last week. The engine's shot, there's no fixing it." He rubbed the back of his neck, as if measuring his next words. "I've saved up a little, but..." His voice wavered slightly before he steadied himself. "Times have been tough, and dealerships don't exactly make it easy for folks like us." As he absent-mindedly turned the crumpled envelope in his hands, his eyes met James's. "I heard you were planning to trade in your truck. I was wondering if maybe I could buy it directly from you." There was both hope and hesitation in his voice. "I can't afford much, but I'd give you everything I've got." There was no mistaking the sincerity in Tom's eyes, and it stirred something deep within James. He knew this wasn't just about a truck. Tom wasn't just trying to make a deal, he was fighting for his son's future. This wasn't just a sale. It was something much more. James took a moment to think. He had come here today expecting to make a simple transaction, but now, standing in front of this man and his son, he realized he had a choice to make. Was he going to treat this like just another deal, or was this his chance to do something greater? James looked at Ethan, a young man trying to stand tall but carrying a quiet weight in his eyes. He remained silent beside his father, his posture stiff with the vulnerability of someone trying to accept reality without breaking. James stole a quick glance at Ryan before turning his attention back to the father and son in front of him. Something inside him stirred. This wasn't just a business transaction. Tom was a father fighting for his son's future, doing everything he could to build something better for him. And Ethan, though shy and reserved, carried a quiet pride and hope in his eyes that James couldn't ignore. "Tell you what," James said, his voice calm and steady. "Let's take a look at a few options. What do you say?" Tom let out a small, weary smile, shaking his head slightly. His gaze dropped to the floor for a moment before he exhaled deeply. "My credit's not good, sir," he admitted, his tone tired but honest. "Even the cheapest truck here is way out of my budget." His grip tightened around the crumpled envelope in his hands, almost as if he were trying to protect what little he had left. Ethan didn't shift beside him, but James could tell Tom was saying far more than his words could express. This wasn't just about buying a truck. This was about a father trying to hold on to hope. And as James stood there, that stirring inside him grew stronger. He wasn't just looking at a customer, he was looking at a man he understood. A man who, in another time, another life, could have been him. James looked at Tom's weary but proud face and then let out a small, knowing smile. That stirring feeling inside him had finally settled into a clear decision. "Leave it to me," he said, his voice steady but gentle. Tom instinctively looked like he was about to object. His brow furrowed slightly, his lips parted as if to protest, but before he could get a word out, James had already turned to Ryan. "Can you bring out that low-mileage F-150 from last week?" Ryan hesitated for a moment, caught off guard, but then he understood exactly what James was doing. A small smile played at the corner of his lips as he gave a nod. "Of course, right away." Tom stood there, speechless. His son's eyes had lit up with hope, but Tom himself was hesitant. He was a man who had spent his life standing on his own feet, and the idea of taking help didn't sit easily with him. "Mr. Carter, James raised a hand slightly, stopping him before he could go any further. "Look, Tom," he said, his tone warm and reassuring. "We've all needed a little help at some point. Just think of this as my turn to pass it on." Tom's eyes glistened, but he quickly lowered his head, trying to hide it. He didn't need to say anything. James understood. He knew the weight of swallowing one's pride, of accepting kindness when all you'd ever known was fighting to make it on your own. Because once upon a time, he had been in that very same place. Ryan hesitated for a moment. His eyes searched James's face, but when he saw that unwavering determination, he didn't question it any further. With a small nod, he gestured for Tom and Ethan to follow him toward the lot. The father and son moved slowly, still caught in the daze of what was happening, their steps uncertain as if they weren't sure this was real. As they walked away, James took a deep breath and pulled his phone from his pocket. Without hesitation, he dialed his general manager. His voice was steady, direct. "Get the financing paperwork sorted," he said, cutting straight to the point. "Make sure that man drives off this lot with a truck today. And don't let him pay a single cent." There was a brief silence on the other end before an approving response came through. James ended the call and looked back toward the lot. From where he stood, he could see Tom running his hands gently over the truck's door, as if afraid it would disappear. Ethan stood beside him, staring at the vehicle with wide-eyed amazement. A few minutes later, Ryan returned. His expression was hard to describe, as if words couldn't quite capture the emotion he had just witnessed. He let out a quiet breath and shook his head slightly before speaking. "Tom broke down in tears," he said softly. "He's never had anything close to a new truck in his life." James blinked, feeling the warmth of something deep inside him. A slow, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corners of his lips. He knew. This wasn't just about a truck. It was about a father's determination, a son's future, and a man who had struggled for so long finally realizing that kindness still existed in the world. And in that moment, James Carter understood that the greatest success wasn't in selling a vehicle, it was in changing a life. James gave a slight nod as he watched the father and son. Tom ran his hand carefully over the truck's smooth surface, almost as if he were afraid it would disappear. He gently traced the hood with his fingers, still unable to believe what was happening. Ethan, however, wasn't looking at the truck. His eyes were fixed on his father. The way Tom's expression shifted between disbelief, gratitude, and raw emotion struck something deep within him. They exchanged a glance, both struggling to find words. As James took in the moment, the warmth inside him grew. He pulled off his cap, ran a hand over his forehead, and exhaled slowly. For a brief second, memories flickered in his mind, times when he had been in a similar place, when someone had extended a hand to him, giving him the chance to move forward. He knew what it felt like to be on the receiving end of kindness. That was why he was standing here today. Ryan approached, pulling James from his thoughts. James turned to the young man with a quiet smile. "Ryan," he said, his voice unusually calm. "There's something I need to tell you." Ryan lifted his head slightly, curiosity flashing in his eyes. He could see it. James hadn't just made a sale today. He had changed a life. And somehow, Ryan knew that whatever James was about to say, it wasn't just about business. Ryan's eyes widened in shock, as if his mind was struggling to catch up with what he had just heard. "Wait. You're James Carter, the boss?" James let out a small smile, absent-mindedly turning his cap between his fingers. He had expected this reaction, but what struck him most was the mixture of admiration and disbelief in Ryan's voice. "Yeah," he said calmly. "But today, I was just a customer." His gaze drifted back to Tom and Ethan. The father and son still stood beside the truck, caught in their own moment. Tom whispered something to his son, quickly wiping at his eyes, but Ethan didn't miss it. The young man placed a light hand on his father's back, his expression filled with quiet gratitude and admiration. James took a deep breath, feeling an unfamiliar but welcome sense of peace settle inside him. "But this," he continued, his voice softer but firm, "reminded me that this business isn't just about sales and profit. It's about people. About doing what's right when we have the chance." Ryan studied him for a long moment. He had treated James like any other customer, unaware of who he really was. But now, standing before him, Ryan saw something more than just a businessman. He saw a man who understood what truly mattered. A brief silence stretched between them before Ryan gave a small nod. Somehow, everything made sense now. Ryan swallowed hard, briefly averting his gaze before looking back at James. He took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "You're a good man, Mr. Carter," he said quietly. James offered a small smile but shook his head. There was something in his expression, regret, perhaps, or the quiet realization of having rediscovered something he hadn't even realized he had lost. "No," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "I just lost my way for a while. But I think I'm finally finding it again." At that moment, Tom stepped forward. His eyes were filled with gratitude, but it was more than just a simple thank you. In that gaze, James saw years of struggle, hardship and most importantly, hope. Tom extended his hand, and James took it in a firm, steady grip. Ethan, standing beside his father, watched James with something more than admiration. It wasn't just gratitude in the young man's eyes, it was something deeper. A belief. The realization that good people still existed, that kindness wasn't just a distant dream but something real, something that could change lives. And in that moment, James remembered why he had started all of this in the first place. It was never about the money. Never about building an empire. It was about this. These moments, where kindness could change the course of someone's life. James took a deep breath, glancing around the showroom. The lights, once just symbols of profit and sales, now felt like something more. This place wasn't just a business. It was a space filled with people, stories, and hope. And that day, James Carter didn't just sell a truck. He lifted the weight off a father's shoulders. He gave a son a chance at a better future. And maybe, just maybe, he found his own way back home. If you want to see more stories like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.